with my normal voice then. Yes, I got into the Tea Party movement when my father-in-law was going to go to a Tea Party event in Cumming, where we live. And, you know, I've been watching the Tea Party thing, and it's like, it's not something for me. I went there that night. And the person speaking that night was Jenny Beth Martin. Anybody ever heard of Jenny Beth? Well, Jenny Beth Martin is a national coordinator. She's one of the founders of the Tea Party movement. She lives in Cherokee County. It just so happened that she was there that night at this local Tea Party. And I had no idea who she was. I had no idea that she's up there in Washington, D.C. on Fox News and all that. It wasn't anything that I listened to. So this was right after the 2012 presidential election, where President Obama won re-election and Romney lost. Of course, everyone over there was very disheartened by that, and she was explaining to the group why that happened and making all kinds of excuses and everything else. But there on the back, behind there, was the Tea Party mantra. It's like a three-legged stool. It is fiscal responsibility, limited government, and free markets. Those are the three standards of the Tea Party. And I find myself in this room with the Tea Party top dog and disagreeing with that conclusion. That if we could just have fiscal responsibility, limited size of government, and free markets, then all would be well. Well, from my understanding of what we're about to go through here, you can't have any of those things in this monetary system, because I know about the monetary system. I've done enough reading and studying on my own, and I have enough training in my mind to be able to put two and two together to know that you can't have free markets when the participants in the markets own the money. So that doesn't work. You can't have fiscal responsibility when the entire monetary system is built upon the fact that you've got to continually put out more debt into the system in order to pay the interest on the existing debt. So fiscal responsibility goes out of the way, and you also can't limit the size of government when one of the biggest debtors in the entire system is the government, and if the government doesn't borrow more money, then the money goes away. And essentially, what we have here is a system that it requires the relentless acquisition of new debt, not only in this country, but worldwide. And that's why I'm talking about how the Federal Reserve is impoverishing America and the world. Because this has infested the entire world as of 1974 when the petrodollar first came into existence. So it's all over the world. And then there's other central banks that are centered in national environments, such as the ECB, which is essentially trying to nationalize the international community in the European community. And what that does is it creates one government over the entire European theater. The reason how it does that is because they're all using a common currency. So whoever owns the currency owns the government. Because everything that you do is based upon the passing of currency from one person to another. If you want to accomplish your goal in this world, that's how you do it. And before I go to the next slide, I do want to say this. I admire David Vogel like I admire few people. I want to say that openly because David got to a certain point in life where he could see that what was going on in our government was not American, is not what needs to be going on in our country in order for the country to flourish. And he has his own understanding and his own knowledge that he'd come to grips with at a certain point in his life. And whereas we've all done that, he did something extra. He took out on foot. The guy took out on foot to try to make a difference in this country. And honest to goodness, I admire that beyond just about anything that you can put as being American. And I think there are a select few people that would do that. And that just tells you something about David Vogel. And I meant to say that before you got into this, but anyway, I'm going to keep on going here. All right, the Federal Reserve is not a conservative issue. It is not a liberal issue. We, as a Tea Party, we're not conservative. We're not liberal. We're just trying to figure out what's going on. It's come to the point where we're more of a watchdog group than anything, because we don't like any of the shenanigans on any side of it. We want the people to be the determinants of their government. The people need to do that. Not private interests, not the people who own the money. The people need to own their own government. And the route to that, and I'm going to lead you toward it, the route to that is, first of all, the people owning their own monetary system. If the people own it, then the people have to say so what it's used for. All right. It rains on the just and the unjust. I say that because whether you're on the right or on the left, you consider yourself on the right or the left, you always figure that you're right and the other guy is wrong. Well, I'm here to tell you, regardless of who's right and who's wrong, we're all getting screwed. So we all have something in common there. And we all have a vested interest in getting this situation fixed. And if we don't, it's going to rain down so hard on everybody that there will be no coming back from this. So we all have a common interest in this. The Federal Reserve is a worldwide problem. And people all over the world are seeing this so much more than Americans are seeing this. Why? Because the people who have the money also own the media. And I don't care who you listen to, I don't care what station you click onto, and I tell people, if you're conservative, you're watching Fox News, you're watching government talking points every time. They'll lead off with a Fox News alert, and Brett Baer will be up there, and he'll give you everything that happened today, and then all of a sudden, according to a government spokesman. Okay, so all of a sudden he's telling you like this is truth, and then all of a sudden he tells you, no, it's not necessarily truth, it's just what we were told. So we're just a mouthpiece for whomever is the byline on that. Well, all of these media outlets do the same thing. And if you're going to find out what's going on in this world, I swear and declare, you're not going to find it on mainstream news. You're going to have to dig on your own. And the greatest way to do that is to get on the internet. Yes, you can find it. If you want to find something on the internet, you will find it. However, there are ways of developing techniques to understand what's true and what's not true. If you don't dig and become your own reporter to yourself of what's real in this world, then you're being led down a primrose path. And you will regret it in the end. All right. In Europe, last fall, there were massive protests. I'm not going to show you this video. There were massive protests in Berlin. What about? About the Federal Reserve. These people have figured out what's going on here. And these people are showing up in mass and having massive demonstrations in downtown Germany. You can find this video online. It's by We Are Change. It's by Federal Reserve Demonstrations, Berlin. In 20 cities all over Europe, these massive demonstrations, but you don't hear about that. They're not going to tell you that here in this country. So unless you go out and find this information, you're not going to find it. All right, so we're going to understand that our fiscal imbalances are a function of America's monetary environment. The monetary environment is the environment in which the economy takes place. So under a particular monetary environment over here, certain things might result. Under a different monetary environment, different things will result. What I'm telling you here is that the fiscal imbalances of this country, which have now added up to $18 trillion, are a direct result of that. But you never hear anybody talking about that. All right? Under a different under a sovereign monetary system, both America's national and private debt would be a completely different picture. See, this system is mathematical. It is designed to do exactly what it's doing. It's designed to impoverish the government, and it's designed to impoverish the people. I'm going to show you exactly how it works. The Federal Reserve System is a bastardization of a free market economic model. You think you have a free market, but when you consider the fact that the Wall Street banks are the owners of the system, then you also begin to understand that the owners of the system run the system for their benefit rather than the benefit of the American people. I'm going to show you that too. The Federal Reserve is a wealth extraction tool. It is a wealth transfer mechanism. It is a way to have the people to work very hard all their lives, but what they end up with is a lower and lower and lower standard of living, something I call trickle-up poverty, because the people at the bottom are affected by this first. And as poverty creeps up through the middle class, then it eventually gets to everybody. And what these people don't know, who are closer to the top, it's going to hit them too, because the system is designed to do this. As long as the Fed is in business, there's absolutely nothing that any of us can do about this mammoth and increasing federal deficit or to restore equity within the American economy. It's baked in the Fed cake. It's mathematical. It can't happen any other way. It is in the math. All right. This is a $1 Federal Reserve note. You may possess these. You may have a lot of these, but you don't own these. If you do own something that has to do with this, it's negative. That's because this is a note. Anybody ever taken out a loan? What did you have to sign? You had to sign a note. A note is a debt instrument. The maker of the note is the Federal Reserve. They're the owner of the note. And the payer of the note is the U.S. government here. And because the U.S. government has the ability to tax us, then they sign us on to have to pay this dollar back to the Federal Reserve. There's no other way to say it. On the day that you were born, you already owe more of these to people you don't know, and you will never know. So many of these that many of us during our entire lives will never earn enough of these to pay back what we conceivably owe on the very day that we are born, much less pay back the interest on that principal, or the new principal that they borrowed to pay the interest on the original principal. This is a system of monetary slavery, and unless we change the system, we cannot get out from underneath the system, this monetary slavery. The kicker of this is that all of these are printed out of thin air and borrowed at interest in the circulation. We'll go through that mechanism for you. So we're indebted to people who have no cost, no equity that they loan to us. It's simply our trusting that it has value that gives it value in the first place. If you go down to the Federal Reserve Bank in downtown Atlanta, there are these big Doric columns. There's massive columns out in front of the building. And you know what all these columns out there are holding up? Nothing! They're holding up nothing. It's all symbology. If you look at the dollar bill, you'll see all kinds of symbology. If you look right there, and if you take a magnifying glass looking right here, what you're going to find is these two little eyes. Right here. You know what that is? It's an owl. This is a symbol. They're already into symbology of what this really represents. The owl represents earthly knowledge, earthly wisdom. And because there's nothing more earthly than money and what money can do here on the earth, it's part of their symbology. So understand that. Every time you're looking at a dollar bill, you're seeing all kinds of symbols you don't really understand. Well, each one of them has a meaning to it. So therefore, because these are all printed out here, just think about that. If the American people could just print these out of there, they could pay back what they owe, could they not? If we could just print these out of the air, just pay off the national debt. I mean, good grief. The only reason why we have a national debt is because we borrowed those and we didn't print them ourselves to begin with. Because they're all coming out of here. So, that's what JFK did back in June of 1963. Notice the difference between these. Not just the red, but the meaning here. Whereas this says Federal Reserve Note, this says United States Note. This was issued by the U.S. Treasury rather than the Federal Reserve. This is what's called sovereign currency. It's owned by the people. Now, it's issued by the government. And do you know, when it's loaned out into the economy by the U.S. government, who receives the interest? The government receives the interest. Now, when this is loaned out into the economy, who receives the interest?
Us.
Private banks receive the interest. If you want to know how Wall Street got too big to fail, it's because they own all of these. And curiously enough, in November of this year, John F. Kennedy was Swiss cheese. Now, that's just a fact. I don't know that that had anything to do with it. But this is what he did in June. And then right after he was shot, they stopped issuing these. But this is the answer right here. I'll give you the answer right now. This is the answer to all of the Tea Party's problems over here. Just use these and not these. And then the interest, that the interest revenues don't go to a private cabal, a private cartel of international bankers. The interest goes to pay the cost of government. That's how that's supposed to work. Article 1, Section 8 says the Congress shall have the power to coin money. The Congress, it's a government function. It's not a private function. And so, I'm getting ahead of myself. But just know that. So, the Fed, according to Barry Goldwater, is a privately owned organization that has absolutely nothing to do with the United States of America. Imagine that. And the landslide defeated him in 1964. But he knew what he was saying. And he was saying exactly what I'm telling you today. Another quote from Thomas Jefferson. The American people allow private banks to control the issuance of their currency. The banks and corporations, get that spring up around them will deprive the people of their property until their children will wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. That is exactly what is going on right now. And if we don't control the issuance of our currency, it will not stop. So I'm going to go into the Fed, what it is, and how money is created. First of all, if you have a growing, every dollar circulation corresponds to an asset of value in the economy for which it was originally exchanged. That means if you borrow money to buy a car, then the value of that money corresponds to the value of the car, and that money comes into existence when you borrow it from the bank. They just write it on a computer screen, and it comes into existence, and you pay it off, and the guy on the other side trusts that there's value here. So there's a one-to-one correspondence there. So in a growing economy, you've got to have a growing money supply. How does the money supply grow in the first place? It's all borrowed into existence from private banks. So growing economy, you've got to have money to pay for the growth. New money is always borrowed into circulation. Money's not just out there. There's not just a bunch of money out there and it's all being paid for back and forth. It's all borrowed into circulation one way or the other. So how is money created? And from whom do we borrow the money in the circulation? We borrow it from the owners of the Federal Reserve System. There are owners who own the money, and we use their proprietary private currency. And this is not just us. This is the European Central Bank. This is the Chinese bank. This is all over the world. But the two major areas, the two that control most of the money, are the Federal Reserve and the ECB. So as new money is borrowed into circulation, is paid back, that money is retired and ceases to exist. Think of it this way. You've got Lake Lanier over here. You have currency being borrowed out of the air. It flows into Lake Lanier, but you also have people letting a certain amount of it out. Well, that's the principle and the interest leading the system. So you've got to have more being borrowed out of the air than leaves for due for dam, or else the amount of currency goes down. As we're going to find out, that's exactly what's happening. That's the mechanism that's impoverishing the American people. The value of our currency with respect to what we have to pay in value is depleting. It's going like this. Well, we got to pay more than there's even money out there available. That's what's going on in this world. So therefore, the Federal Reserve currency remaining in the outstanding money supply is paying interest to the owners of the Federal Reserve. Every dollar out there is in some way or fashion paying interest to the owners of the system. You've heard the term inflation before. Inflation is a devaluation of the currency. It's not a normal effect of a free economy. Inflation is really the interest that we're paying on the money supply. That amount of devaluation of the currency accrues to the owners of the system. That's how the system works. There is no free lunch. Every time a dollar is created out of thin air and there's no increase in economic value for which it is exchanged, there's no car that you're buying that someone invested in for you to then purchase. It's just being printed out of the air and handed out there. That dollar comes out of the wallets of the holders of the rest of the currency. That value, which equates to buying power, is literally stolen out of their accounts. So if they're just going to print money, and they're going to take that money and hand it to people, but they don't, it's like stock. You know what a stock split is? It's where everybody that owns some stock gets some new stock and they just split it in two, but still the value goes back down by half. Well, what if they took that stock and they split it again, but then they take the new and they concentrate it into a few hands? Well, wait a minute, that devalues the stock in your hands, does it not? Well, that's exactly what happens whenever they print money and then concentrate the money in certain people's hands. So this is what the Federal Reserve says right here. I'm going to single on a couple of things that they said to try to make a point here. This is right off of their website. Who owns the Federal Reserve? According to the Fed's website, the Federal Reserve System fulfills its public mission as an independent entity within government. These terms that I have highlighted here are vitally important to kind of get conceptual in your head to understand how the system works. Independent within government. Now, why should anything be independent if it's within the government in the first place? Does that even make conceptual sense that we would authorize our government to put independent things inside there that the government just can't even touch anymore? Well, just think about that. As a nation's central bank, the Federal Reserve derives its authority from Congress and is considered independent because the monetary decisions do not have to be approved by the President or anyone else in the executive or legislative branches of the government, and it does not receive funding appropriated by Congress. Of course not. It prints its own money. Bernanke or Janet Yellen, she just goes in there, prints her own paycheck, and puts it in and takes it to another Federal Reserve Bank, in which and then they take the money, multiply it by 10, and buy stock with it. But anyway, that's go beyond what I want to do. So it derives its authority from Congress. Let's think about that. Article 1, Section 8 says the Congress shall have the power to coin money. That's a government function. Wait a minute. This is independent. It's not government. This is independent. So all of a sudden, boom, unconstitutional right there. The government is supposed to be in charge of printing the legal tender of our country. And this is all right there on the Federal Reserve website. You can find it yourself. The Federal Reserve this is what they say, can be more accurately described as independent within government rather than independent of government. This is so telling. Independent within, but not of. It's not of the government. It's not a government entity. The Congress made this independent agency and then placed it beyond its reach. It made it, and it's out there, and they can't get to it. They can't get to it because now it owns the right to create money. And if you own an infinite amount of money, you have infinite opportunity to affect what the government does. This is the essence of how our nation and the world is being corporatized, because this is a corporate entity within the government. Because the Fed is independent and because it is not owned by anyone, the Fed is the sovereign of our country. The United States government has no wherewithal whatsoever unless it borrows from the Fed or if it taxes what we have borrowed from the Fed. So the U.S. government is no longer sovereign. The Fed gave away its sovereignty 100 years ago to these people. That is what I'm describing to you here is the essence of what is wrong, not only in our country, but in the entire world. In 1913, the Congress of the United States created a sovereign government. A sovereign government. One that operates in the shadows of secrecy. Therefore, it is a shadow government. I'm not just making these terms, I'm deriving them for you so that you understand what I'm saying. and embedded it within the federal government, but which is not part of the federal government. Just using what they are saying. That's the conclusion that we're going to derive. And the Congress delegated its constitutional authority to appoint money to that shadow government. This is so telling when you start really conceptually understanding how this happens, and then you go and listen to the news, all of a sudden you go, oh, okay, this is making sense now. All right, graphically, this is the Federal Reserve Central Bank. It is placed within the federal government, but it is insulated from the federal government. The federal government has no say-so unless you can get an act of Congress signed by the president. We know how difficult that is to do anything about this. So we have a shadow government within the U.S. federal government, insulated from the federal government. It is not part of the federal government. The Fed goes to say, the 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, see, they try to make the case that this is independent and it's not tainted by any particular point of view. Well, I'm going to show you that's false. The 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, which were established by the Congress as the operating arms, this is their words, these 12 regional Federal Reserve banks are the operating arms of the central banking system, are organized similarly to private corporations. They issue shares of stock to member banks. And so according to the Fed, 12 regional Federal Reserve banks issue shares of stock to commercial, private member banks and are therefore owned by those private banks. So the operating arms of the federal Reserve System, is privately owned. So if you own the operating arms, you might as well own the central bank because it's all the same system. So the system is owned privately. Our money is owned by these people. So here's graphically, you've got the Federal Reserve Central Bank within the government, but then outside of that, you've got the 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, operating arms of the central banking system, and there are 1,700 Federal Reserve banks. But of those 1,700 Federal Reserve banks, 10 banks on Wall Street own 70% of the capitalization of the entire system. These are the two biggest failed banks on Wall Street. So each one of those 10, owning 70% of the stock, have the say-so about what happens within the system. And so if they crash, they can say, hey, we're crashing. You need to save us. Well, then there's politics in there too. Well, who we can save and who we're not going to save. Well, why don't we pile all of our debts on Lehman Brothers and then cast them to the wind? Well, they could do that because it's all done on computer screens. It's printed out in the air. There's no equity behind the system to begin with. So here we go. The answer to the question, private commercial banks in each region of the United States, which together own the 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, which are the operating arms of the central banking system. See, I'm deriving this for you. That at its core is the Federal Reserve Central Bank, which is a shadow government operating within the United States federal government, and which owns all the authority to print and distribute money according to its own desires. That is who owns the system, and that's how the system works. You, I, the federal government, the President of the United States, we have no say-so about what they do with this money. They can do anything they want to do with this money as long as they say that they are pursuing the mandate of maximizing employment and minimizing inflation. Well, what does that mean? That can mean anything. Any policy that they initiate at the Fed, they can say that they are following the dual mandate. So the dual mandate is meaningless. You know what it means? Power corrupts, absolute. Power corrupts, absolutely. I'm sure you've all heard that before. Well, I think it's true. Money is power. The ability to have money in your hands is the ability to make someone else do something that they either might want to do or might not want to do. But your power is that money in your hands. The Fed possesses an absolutely unlimited storehouse of money because they print it out of the given. The American banking system, as it is operated, is therefore nothing but a recipe for absolute corruption. And that is what we see, and that is what's leading our country down the road. The commercial banks of the Federal Reserve System through the Fed possess ownership and direct influence over a shadow government that operates within the people's government of the United States of America. The Federal Reserve System, therefore, exists for the private purposes of the commercial member banks and not directly for any purposes of the American people. The system is operating not for us, it's operating for the banks. They own the system, and they let us, and this is a business proposition for them to loan out their money for us to use, and the only reason why we can use it is it's debt, it's debt. It has to be paid back in interest. So, because it's debt, but it's legal tender. You think about it, you could use dogs and cats for legal tender. All you got to do is have a law saying dogs are worth 10 cats. So all that dog's better. But then you think about it, you have to tote all those dogs and cats around. But it's legal tender. So legally, someone would have to take so many dogs to buy a car, or so many cats to buy your groceries, or whatever it is. So what we have here is debt as our legal tender. I want to get that conceptually in your head because people have a hard time understanding that. Wait a minute, this is not an asset. This is a liability walking around. Yes, that's why it loses value because you don't own it. Federal Reserve notes are called notes because they represent debt owed back to the Federal Reserve System. Every dollar of Federal Reserve currency that presently resides in any account that you may have, or any account in the entire world, is ultimately owed back to the Fed, is in some direct or indirect way paying interest back to the Fed, importantly, through the member banks. Before it goes back to the central bank and you retire a debt, it is filtered of profits. It is filtered of profits by the Fed member banks because they're the ones that reissue the currency. They get the currency from the Fed. It goes onto the balance sheet. They talk about increasing the balance sheet, the Fed's balance sheet. We've all heard that term before. Well, it's because whenever they make a dollar, then they also check a box saying their owner's equity is that dollar. They own it, but then it gets debited out into the banks. The banks then credit it on their side, and then they debit it back out, but then and loan it into the economy. The entire American money supply is retrieving constant yield back to the Federal Reserve System. For this reason, the Fed is constantly motivated to increase the money supply. How are you going to maximize profit? If you get paid interest on money, get more money out there. That's how they get paid. You understand why now they like inflation? They hate inflation, deflation, because when the money is deflating, that means that what is it? It takes less of them to buy more. They want more of them to buy less. That's the way they keep the system going. The system is based upon the relentless acquisition of new debt into the economy. If it doesn't issue new debt out there, then the system bankrupts. That's how it's set up. Even the United States government, which was created that created the Federal Reserve, must pay interest to the Federal Reserve. So it created it, it put it outside of its reach, and now we have to get the money from them to pay them back interest. Now, has anybody ever thought about that? I asked this question. I don't know when it occurred to me, but did it ever occur to think why the American government, supposedly sovereign, has to borrow to pay its bills? The most powerful